Welcome, everybody. My name is Nicole Desane. I am the founder of the HR.Hackathon Alliance. In case this is your first event today, let me just tell you a little bit about the HR.Hackathon Alliance. I founded it about 4 years ago because I wanted to provide a safe space for HR professionals to experience and experiment with the design thinking method. Fast forward, we've grown to 3,600 global virtual community members. We've generated 700 plus ideas, and we have 12 plus partners across the world. And our signature event is what's called an HR Hackathon, which are led by local hosts. There's hyper local events, and it's a 2-hour event where an HR department brings a key challenge, and then there's others, 20 to 50 other HR professionals invited, and we ideate solutions around it. So those are our signature in-person events. But then with the pandemic, we wanted to offer out virtual events. And so starting this year, the last Friday every month, we're just kicking off today, is this virtual skill and community building event that we're kicking off. And today is the new year. So in a minute, we're gonna bring Sam up on the stage to tell us a little bit and help us understand and unpack creativity a little bit. But before we do that, I wanted to do a little creativity activity for us to get us started. I can get to this. Okay. So let's do this. So let's do a little introduction activity, and I'll go first. Okay, so I want you to introduce yourself. Either you have like a piece of paper or a Post-it and draw your superpower on it. So mine, if you can see this here in the camera, is connecting the dots. All right, and you can see it doesn't have to be like, Rembrandt kind of drawing, just, some remedial sort of creative act that shows what your superpower is. And before you ask, yes, everybody has one. All right, so take a minute and draw it on whatever kind of piece of paper is in front of you. And then if you can, turn on your video, that would be great, and share and introduce yourself a little bit through your superpower. Whoever feels comfortable starting.
I'll go first.
Yay! All right.
I don't know. I think my superpower is empathy. So I have a lot of feeling.
Yeah, love that. So it's like two people and the heart in the middle.
Yeah. Sorry.
And that's a handy superpower for, especially when you're in HR. So that's great. Taratha or Aiko, would you like to share? People are still crafting their superpowers. So why don't we then start with you, Sam?
Sure.
And get you started, get you introduced, and maybe we can start our little Q&A, and you start with your superpower. I'm dying to hear what yours is.
So it's great to be here. So small crew is a good crew. My superpower, just to sort of go further into this malleability thing, is being malleable in spirit. So I've kind of drawn a sort of shape-shifting little creature here. That is really how I see myself, a shape-shifting creature. So yeah, that's my superpower.
That's hilarious. So do you want to tag on a little bit and introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, my name is Sam Furness, and I am the founder and quest leader at Channel 12. We produce experiences, workshops, and content that help people and organizations explore their creativity and their worldviews in kind of new and innovative ways. So Channel 12 has kind of been a long-term project of mine, which has evolved from a hobby into an experiment, into a side project, and now has been a business for the last 2 years, which I've been full-time on for just over a year. So it really has been, well, I can kind of get into the story a bit later, I suppose, but of Creative Quest, which is our main program. But this kind of way of thinking and kind of creativity really has taken me on a journey over the last 7 years to kind of now sharing my story and some of the ways that I work with other people in the hope that it unlocks creativity and different ways to see the world for all sorts of people now.
Wonderful. And thanks for joining us. Really appreciate you sharing your insights with us. So we got a lot of really, really good questions from people who signed up for this event in advance. So I thought I would ask some of those, do a little Q&A, and then we can go from there. So why don't we start, pretty basic with what is creativity? And I just want to say I'm still learning as a non-creative myself. And I recently read, I don't know if you know that Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert, and she is the author of Eat, Pray, Love fame. And she kind of codified, if you will, her creative process in the book. And what she is saying is that everybody can step in their creative self, which I found very liberating. And so she defines creativity as the relationship between a human being and the mysteries of inspiration. Do you want to build on that definition and add your own to that?
Yeah, well, what is creativity? It sounds like a basic question, but it is an infinitely complicated question, and will really differ with every single person that you ask. And I think that in itself is an indication of what creativity is. I think often creativity is viewed as this monolithic kind of thing, but I think if you shone creativity through a prism, it would break down into so many different parts: curiosity, awareness, bravery, vulnerability, optimism, patience, improvisation, playfulness, generosity, collaboration, listening. There are so many parts to creativity. That list could go on and on and on, and it would be different for every, different person. And I think that kind of actually focusing on cultivating actually those individual properties of what creativity is kind of how we cultivate this sense of creativity in ourselves and sort of grow what we imagine our creativity to be. So for me, creativity is really a spirit in yourself to kind of nurture, rather than skills to be kind of acquired. I think just through how we're kind of taught at school and just generally the way the world works, that we live in a very drop down menu world, like everyone's trying to fit into a drop down menu in some way, shape or form, whether it's the job you do or how you identify or where, or your age bracket or whatever. It's all about being in a box. And yeah, I think that has kind of forced people into this, like, okay, well, I have to just be this thing. Like, if I don't fit in this box, if I'm not a graphic designer, if I'm not an illustrator or a copywriter or whatever it is, then my creativity doesn't actually really exist. I run a business that literally helps people live more creative lives, hundreds of people around the world. My job does not fit in many drop-down menus, and people would, lots of people would look at the stuff that I do and say, like, well, sounds like insanely creative. But even I struggle to describe sometimes what it is that we do, I guess, because I'm always kind of shape-shifting and evolving my creative practice. So for me, creativity really it's a spirit that encompasses lots of other kind of ways of doing things. yeah, it's
so it sounds like similar
awesome.
to Elizabeth Gilbert, and I find that again a very liberating sort of thought that we don't have to conform to like a set maybe definition of what a creative is, but we have to like the goal is more to uncover what's creative inside ourselves and then sort of liberate that. Is that sort of a fair
it's
description?
absolutely, I think, yeah, to build on that, it's to inhabit those kind of qualities in yourself. And through my paths of exploring creativity in all kinds of different ways through Creative Quests, which I will tell you about in a minute because it's quite essential. Through Creative Quests, sorry, what was I saying? Through exploring different parts of Creative Quests, it's kind of led me into exploring the intersection of creativity and perception, the perception being the way that we see the world. And through the courses or the programs that I run, it's really been very clear to me that everybody sees the world completely differently. Our Creative Quest program is basically a month-long learning experience around a theme. So people sign up for 1 month and we all explore color together, or patterns, or sound, or broader themes like home or time. And we kind of think, okay, what does the world look like if color is the sort of thing that we're drawn to, like what do we notice in our surroundings? What activities might we use to explore color? Where might we visit in the city, town that we live in that can help us understand color in a new way? And one of the most amazing things is seeing how a group of people that sign up to these quests, everyone's perception of, say, color is really different from the beginning anyway. And I think the process that we try and cultivate people through, guide people through, is this idea that actually your perception is your creativity. The way that you see the world is different to somebody else, and that gives you something. That means that if you can actually turn that way that you see the world into an action, that to me is the creative act.
I love that. And we had a really good question that builds on that. How does courage play into creativity? I love that, because so the subtitle of Elizabeth Gilbert's book again is Creative Living Beyond Fear. So there's the fear maybe of not being creative enough, or not feeling like I can't step into it. But then so the counterpart to that is courage. So I kind of love the juxtaposition of the two. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. Living a creative life is to feel the fear and do it anyway.
Say more about that.
There is a huge amount of vulnerability that comes with being creative, because you are constantly dealing with the unknown. The unknown is your biggest collaborator. You have to constantly step into that next part of the process, or that next part of yourself, to make the thing that you're trying to create that little bit clearer. And that only happens through courage. I think it's when we're not feeling brave, that's when we get stuck. And yeah, I mean, for some people, obviously creativity is about actually making things, like expressing themselves in an artistic way, but creativity shows up in all kinds of ways. Like, when you speak about courage, like you can say you've got a difficult relationship that you're trying to navigate. Maybe it's a romantic relationship, or maybe it's a work relationship, friend relationship, whatever. I think you can be creative in in your relationships, the way that you speak to people, and the way that you hold space. It really is a kind of an approach. I think, like if you're having a difficult conversation with somebody, like to pull on some of those words that I pulled on earlier, like patience is a great skill to have if you're navigating a difficult conversation. Patience is really important to creativity. really listening is really important to creativity, and that is something that you might want to sort of take into a, you know, a conversation you're having with
Or
somebody.
empathy, like
Empathy,
Megan's
yeah.
superpower.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, courage is huge. It's, yeah, there's a quote out there, I don't know who said it originally, but you know, when I think about it a lot when I'm making plans for new projects and really trying to dream big, and there's a question I ask myself, which is, what would I do if I wasn't afraid?
Yeah,
You
so
know,
it's playing again with the fear and the right.
you know what?
Interesting.
Yeah. So, and I think when you frame it around that, you go, oh well, actually, yeah, you realize that fear is the blocker, you know. But I think you can learn to befriend fear for sure, and see fear as a kind of an indicator that when that sort of like feeling of like, oh, am I out of my depth here? Like this feels uncomfortable. I'm stepping into vulnerability. I think over time and over repetition, you learn to notice that that feeling is actually the sign that you should do the thing, you know? And or because that's when you're stepping into new ground. And then over time, that new ground becomes not new ground, it becomes a place that you feel comfortable with. And then there's a whole new space that before you took that last step seemed unimaginable, but you are now a little bit further into that path. And I think it's just, that's how we progress, is through stepping into these feelings of discomfort again and again and again, and teaching ourselves that, you know, 9 times out of 10 it's going to be okay.
So it sounds like courage pushes you towards creativity in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. Answering the call to creativity is a courageous act.
This is really something really interesting to unpack, I think, for everybody. How do you show up in that way, and what gets in the way, right? And that leads me to sort of to another question that I'm also very curious about. How can non-creatives become more creative?
Well, yeah, I guess the term like non-creatives is a funny one to begin with. Even actually, I was looking at the event, and I was, you know, flattered to be written as like a sort of creativity expert. But even that in itself, I'm sort of, you know, not to diss any copywriting skills, because it's a compliment, but it's one of those things. Like, some of the most creative people that I've ever met through Creative Quests, you know, I've been doing these monthly explorations for like 7 years, and I've explored about 25 or so different themes in that time. And obviously we turned it into a community program a few years ago that other people join. Some of the most creative people I've met in those last 2 years have not been like artistic people at all. You know, one person particularly comes to mind, who's a sports coach, and just has amazingly playful and creative techniques for teaching athletes about agility and timing. And but you just wouldn't to looking at thinking about a sports coach, you think, well, sports coaching is probably generally more about like metrics and like numbers and technicality and all that kind of stuff that seemed almost like not the opposite of creativity, but it's it's harsher than creativity or something. So I think, yeah, how can non-creatives become more creative? Yeah, I'm going to keep coming back to it, but this feeling of not tackling creativity as this monolith thing is breaking it down. It's okay, how does so curiosity, huge part of what it means to be creative. I would start with like, how does a non-creative person become more curious to begin with? You know, like, I think creativity to me is a feeling, you know, and I think when people feel more creative, feel more inspired, the more likely to answer that call and feel courageous and step through any of that fear or that anxiety that you might look foolish or you might be really bad. If you've got that sort of like illuminated feeling, like that is fuel, you know. So I would start with that. How can you be more curious about new things, new ways of being in the world? And there's tons of ways. I think, you know, we go through our lives, especially as we get older, you know, our lives are kind of, and I think this is definitely totally down to educational systems as the way they are. Like our lives go like this, you know, like we're kind of taught like, okay, you start really wide when you're a kid, and then you just kind of like specialize. And then there's a point that you retire, and then it's like, great freedom, I can just do all these new things now. And it's like, that is ludicrous to me. That is ludicrous to me. I think, of course, you want to get better at things. You want to sharpen your tools and you want to get expertise. Like that is a great thing to aspire to, because it drives you forward, especially, you know, if there's a thing you're really passionate about. Passion is an amazing thing if you can harness it and find it, because not everybody does. That's totally fine. But if you do find it, it's an amazing thing, because your passion will really take you on an adventure. But yeah, we kind of go like this, and I think like we need to create more intersections where we're kind of going more like this, you know, like we're kind of like skilling up, and then we're going, okay, cool, I've got to a good point with that where my skills are going to compound nicely over time, but I'm going to go back out into the world and I'm going to explore a bit more, etc. Yeah.
And I also found that, so I found that example that you shared about the sports coach inspiring, like how he applied, in essence, playfulness to his job. So if I think about HR, that's sort of to me an analogy, right? How can you become more inspired or curious or courageous or creative in whatever your HR task or role is, as a starting point as well?
Well, yeah, I think like, as you know, as HR people, you're the people person, I guess. You know, I'm not an HR person, so I can only speak about this from a sort of I guess a slightly kind of outsider perspective. But you know, I think it seems to me like there's so much opportunity for HR professionals to create environments which can foster creativity in new ways. Like, as I said, I think first step to becoming more creative is to just the possibility of feeling more creative, you know. And I think that comes a lot through environment. You know, if stepping into something in there, like creativity has a lot to do with novelty as well. I think that's where we find inspiration a lot of the time. We don't often find inspiration in the corners of life that are well trodden and that we're familiar with. We find inspiration in newness. And I think you know, the actual act of making something is often, and certainly in like more innovation spaces and artistic spaces, is about like, where does the things that you know to be true as a human being, your beliefs, the things that you're passionate about, your taste, your style, like where does that meet something new, you know? And it's often in between that, like the stuff you know to be true and the new thing that's kind of shaking you up a little bit. It's in that intersection that I think great creative acts happen.
And that's so cool. So how can you give us some like practical ideas for how can we practice creative mindsets, methods, and habits? Or what habits might get in the way of being creative that we currently might have? I thought that was an interesting twist on the question from an audience member.
Yeah, for sure. I love that one. Yeah, it's perfect actually, based off what I was just saying. Familiarity is an absolute vacuum when it comes to creative thinking and creative living. You know, it's so easy, despite the, you know, if you're I guess living a privileged life to a degree, the amount of options that we have in the world to do different stuff. You know, if you live in a major city or even in like a decent sized town, like there are tons and tons of things that you could be doing. Imagine all the different lives that people are leading in the city that you live in. Not everybody lives the same life there. Everyone has their own little individual routines and interests that they do in the place that you live in. But somehow it's really easy to get stuck in the cycle of just doing the same stuff over and over again, going to the same places, surrounding yourself with the same people, just the same all the time. And the same goes for our lives on the internet. We do the same things out there again and again and again. And the internet is an infinitely big city that everyone in the world, however many internet, I think it's like 65% of the world is on the internet. Like that's billions of people that all live on the internet a lot of the time. Yet we all just get into this pattern of listening to the same voices and going on
bubble.
the same and yeah, the risks and the dangers of this are well documented from a sociological point of view, a political point of view, cultural point of view, creating these echo chambers where we just believe the world to be the way that it is, through the way that we interface with it. And I think it's a real shame, not that people don't try new things more, not just from it's a shame because life's short and, get out there, try some new things, challenge yourself point of view, but also from the perspective of being creative and coming up with innovative ideas. I think you have to interface, you have to create connection with newness to get that rush of inspiration. So I would say that, practice or a method, habit that people can introduce into their lives is what's a regular practice of trying something new or going somewhere new or listening to something new or reading something new, because it's in that newness that you will find those surprising things and people in the world that you didn't know exist. And that little moment of surprise is it's a gateway, it's a little opening of a door that you can peek through and be like, oh wow, there's a whole new world through here that I didn't even know about. So I'd say that's one small step that is easily achieved.
That. Yeah, I love that. I even read, like, if you go for a walk every day, and I'm guilty of that, I go the same route every day, and they say, just take a different turn sometimes. Exactly. Right. So in your daily routines, right, how can you wear off a path you usually literally or figuratively walk on?
Yes, exactly that.
So you have hinted at creative quests. We have to let people wait for the big reveal. You've hinted at creative quests for a little bit. Why don't you tell us a little bit more what they are and maybe immerse us a little bit in them?
Sure. So creative quests, I'll give you the very quick backstory. Basically, it started about 7 years ago. It wasn't called Creative Quests at the time. I was in a job, been there, that I really liked, been there for a few years, and began to feel this kind of, I noticed the familiarity in my life and wanted to do something about it. So I thought, I could kind of do with getting a bit of creativity back in my life. I studied kind of creative arts and throughout school, and the working world I just didn't quite seem to fit how I used to sort of be creative. So I set myself a challenge for a year to explore a different form of creativity each month in my spare time. It's a way to learn some new skills, meet some new people. And so I did this whole year where I explored something new each month. And as the year progressed, I kind of just got more and more obsessed with the process. Like, it just felt amazing to just be exploring new things each month, meeting new people. And this is what kind of taught me about seeing the world through different lenses, I guess. And after that year, I thought, well, this feels like it should be more than just a project I did one time. Maybe this could just be part of my, I guess, my creative process. Like, how exciting to have a creative process. Like, it makes me sound like a real artist. So I just kept doing these explorations, these monthly projects, as I call them at the time. And yeah, themes were things like origami, animation, storytelling, photography, patterns, all sorts. And it was no end goal with any of them. It wasn't like, okay, I'm gonna like, it's gonna lead to this thing. And it was just enjoying the learning. And if it developed into a project, cool. If it didn't, also cool. And yeah, it took many years and lots of conversations and quite organic growth, but it felt like there was a point where something was missing from my explorations, which was other people. I was just kind of doing all this stuff on my own. I thought, wow, what would this be like if there was all these like, what if there was like 5 more people or 10 more people all exploring the same theme? Like, I know how much I can learn in a month, but imagine if that was times by 5, 10, however many more people. So yeah, beginning of not last year, 2021, so 2 years ago, we launched Creative Quests. I had kind of set up my company at this point. I was still working in the same job that I had when I started it. And yeah, we've done 8 quests since then. And it's different in scale. And obviously there's like a framework, there's workshops and guest speakers and a community platform and all that stuff. But in its essence, it is still really what it was 7 years ago. It's about setting a calendar month, choosing a theme that you probably don't know all that much about, and just inviting it into your life, you know, not just seeing it as, okay, well, this month is photography, so I'm going to learn how to take photos. How would a photographer move through the city that you live in? Where would they find interesting? So you think about what a photographer might have to think about, stuff like light, for example. Where's amazing light in London or wherever you happen, or New York or Berlin or wherever you happen to be? Where are the old camera shops, you know, that you can go in there and you can speak to the owner and hear some interesting story about this place that they've been running for 20 years? Or what books might you read or podcasts might you listen to? And of course, yes, you'd want to take some photos too, but it's really about embracing these themes as like a whole life attitude. And, you know, people often when they join Creative Quests come in saying like, oh, I'm doing this because I never find time for my creativity. And I've really struggled to find the time. And I think that's because we often think of creativity as a thing that we need to set aside time to do. And obviously, yes, it's great if you have that time, and time to focus on making things is a luxury and a privilege. But there is ways that you can embed creativity into those in between moments of your day. You can make the walk to, you know, the train station in the morning on your way to work, that 10-minute walk or whatever it happens to be, you can make that a creative walk if you want to, you know, set yourself a little think, all right, on this walk onto the station, I'm just going to look for everything that is the color red, or I'm going to like try and look for everything that reminds me of love, or whatever it happens to be. You know, it's about awareness and just going into the world with a slightly different intention. And it's amazing what shows up when you move through the world with a more pointed like viewpoint. Really, the world through the eyes of somebody exploring through origami is very different to the looking through the eyes of a skateboarder, you know. Like they're different worlds. And it really just takes that curiosity, you know, to say, well, maybe I could see differently too. Maybe there are new ways that I could be creative too.
And so it's almost like when you talked before, we talked about habits, creating creative habits and doing something new. I feel like the quests provide sort of prompts and nudges that help, like remind us to do these things, right? Where if you just say, do more new things, it's probably harder to by yourself come up with this. And so you're providing sort of structured prompts and nudges along the way to remind people to do those, to hone those habits, it sounds to me.
Yeah, exactly. Like I guess through doing this over years, I've kind of managed to create some frameworks that you can apply really most themes to, and I guess come up with ideas. But yeah, lots of our role as the kind of hosts of Creative Quests is to, yeah, give people a nudge in the right direction. I got asked an amazing question a few years ago by a friend when I was really in the weeds of trying to figure out what Creative Quest could be. It took me years to launch this as a community program. And I was really struggling with how much I wanted us to be involved in people's individual journeys. And he said, would you rather, and I think this is probably quite interesting in terms of the role of like an HR actually, would you rather, would you rather nurture 10 people or nudge 100? Or, oh yeah, would you rather nurture 10 people or nudge 1,000, I think he said. And
interesting.
And I was like, wow, okay, that's an amazing question. And I spent some time with it and I realized it wasn't quite either.
No, it's a hard one to answer, right? I'm curious what your answer was.
Yeah, well, my answer was I would rather deeply nudge 100 people.
Yeah.
I thought, you know, what does actually give, what if you're just going to give somebody a nudge, what's the bit after the nudge which means that they feel supported? Because I think a nudge, right, in this day and age is probably a notification on your phone. It's an going like, do this now, and that didn't really feel like enough. But what happens if, but also nurturing 10 people through a month, like I managed music artists for nearly 10 years and that's about as nurturing as it gets. Trust me.
Cats.
and I didn't want to kind of get back into that. I was like, I feel like I've done that. I know what it means to really go on a journey with one person or a very small group of people. So that was like, didn't seem too interesting either. But I thought, okay, well, maybe actually if you're in a group of people that you've got to know and you're all there for the same purpose and you've all received this nudge at the same time, and you know that your job as a community is to make sure that you know, that nudge that you've given somebody is followed through accountability and through support and through conversation. That's kind of much more where Creative Quests is. We're not guiding people through it. We're not like Bob Ross, you know, like, do you get this bit and you paint here and blah, 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 and hey, you've made a whole picture. It's more like we create the conditions and the community in which something like a nudge can actually turn into a ripple, you know, and you can, you know, go further than you would have done on your own.
Is that like, by any chance, did you bring a nudge or an example, like an immersive task that you can share with us? If not, we can just move on to next sort of steps. But if you had something, could be cool to share with folks.
Well, the thing that I planned was kind of works better as a group activity, but I guess there is 4 of us. Let me just think. A little nudge that you could do. Well, I'd say it's not one for right now. I guess after the session you could do it as a bit of a homework, I guess.
Yeah.
But I think one thing that we could do is just to kind of illustrate this point of everybody seeing things a bit differently. We can just do a really quick few minute exercise that we do at the beginning of Creative Quest.
Okay, cool.
Called throwing paint at the wall. And don't worry, you're not going to be actually throwing any paint on your walls. You don't need any paint. It's a figurative term, a fancy way of basically saying word association. So I'm going to put some prompts up on this screen. Where are you? Here we are. And basically, let's pick a theme. So let's go with color, actually. Let's go with color, seeing as we've used that reference today. Okay, so imagine that color is going to be your theme for your creative quest, right? Something that we do in the first exercise, in the first session of Creative Quest, is kind of understand how different people in the group all perceive color. So hang on, just got to make this a little bit smaller. Can you see that, right?
Yeah.
There we go, great. So I'm going to put 3 minutes on the clock, and you're just going to need a pen and paper for this one. And basically, I want you to just empty your mind of everything that comes to mind when you think of color. Now, I've put some prompts up on this screen to kind of get you thinking about something like color in different kinds of ways. So, you know, what places could, you know, kind of make you think of color, or could you explore color? Are there any people, whether that is people in your life or well-known people from history, that you know kind of explored color in some way? What objects make you think of color? Feelings? Are there sounds that make you feel like remind you of color? Are there books on color that you need? Are there any games that you could play that help you explore color? These are all just prompts. First of all, I would say don't look at the prompts, just do a simple word association, putting everything on a piece of paper that you can. And then once you've kind of hit a bit of a limit, then look up at these prompts and start using them as kind of little inspirational door openers. Remember, there's nothing wrong here. In fact, we want as many kind of different random weird things in there as possible. Quite often people write things down and they're like, I just have no idea why that popped into my mind when I thought of color or whatever our theme is. But then you unpick it through conversation, suddenly you realize, wow, that's really interesting that I've got this way of sort of perceiving. Okay, so I'm going to put 3 minutes on the clock.
Maybe could we do 1 minute for the session, and then we can do individually more, maybe.
Sure. All right, 1 minute. Okay, off you go.
All right. Wow, this is hard.
Okay, that's 1 minute, so not a lot of time at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, normally we give people like 5 minutes for that.
5.
So which in 5 minutes you really start reaching some sort of interesting,
because you can dig deeper. Because at the beginning I can just share my process.
Yeah, please.
Speaking about being blocked, fear, and courage, right? So my first reaction was, oh my God, this is overwhelming. You know, I have to go through all of this, and I'm a very organized person, so that got in the way, right? So I feel like talking about barriers and what gets in the way, right? I felt like those got in the way. Once I would sort of put them aside, I could actually think. So that was just an observation I had about,
interesting,
you know, what we talked about before, what might get in the way. I think sometimes you can get in your own way.
Oh my God. Yeah,
You know?
you are, yeah, that's not you in particular. You know what I mean.
Yeah.
We are our own biggest blockers. That is for sure.
But it did give me a reminder that under the art section, I then came up with painting, and that reminded me I hadn't been to the Chicago Art Museum in a while, and that I should go back. So
absolutely should.
Thank you for that. If anybody else had anything interesting, feel free to put it in the chat or unmic yourself.
Oh,
yeah.
This is Taratha. The first thing that came to mind was animals. I'm not sure.
Interesting.
I'm not sure if you're
cool.
familiar with that, but it was, I don't know if it's still a company, but it was a company that made baby clothes that were coordinated. They had little animals on the clothes so the kids would know how to match the
Oh,
clothing.
I've heard about it. I've heard about it. Yes. That's so funny.
There you go.
I love it.
I love that.
Oh, and
So
Sam, yep, do you have something more?
no, I was
Go
just
ahead.
saying that was.
Yeah. And Sam, and then what do you do after this? Just close us out, what you would do
for
with
sure.
this, and then we can move
So
forward.
we get people into rooms and we get people to read their lists to each other. So, you know, some people's lists are massive and you think, how on earth have you got that many things out in 5 minutes? Some people have got like 5-10 things. But the idea is that you add things to your list that you didn't have, but other people have.
So you get inspired by others. I guess
Yeah,
maybe that's another tip for creativity, right? You
Yeah.
can only go so far by yourself,
Yeah.
but by
exactly.
inviting others' perspectives, you can get even more creative.
Yeah. And then we help people sort of that go from there. It's like, okay, well, what are the things on that list? If you went back through with a highlighter, what are 5 things on that list that think, oh, actually, that's interesting to me. And then from there, it's like, okay, well, how can you explore those individual things rather than just exploring color as this massive thing? It's like, oh, well, suddenly you're like much more specific and you're looking at pigments or you're looking at, you know, whatever it happens to be. It's just a way of narrowing down the options.
I love that. And that is, you know, also, of course, when we get, that's why creativity is part of design thinking, because when we talk about ideation, that is exactly that. It's like, it's a team sport, right? There's an individual component, a solitary part where you have to think and get inspired, but then in combination and in co-creation with others, you expand upon your ideas. So this is sort of the underpinnings of ideation and design thinking. I love that. Yeah. We had a few more questions around, let me call it I can't even talk anymore. Operationalizing, there we go, creativity. So what are some practical steps anyone can take tomorrow to unleash, or tomorrow, I guess they can start on Saturday, to unleash their creativity?
Well, I think we've covered a lot of it. I think the thought of just kind of people are going to be at different comfort levels, right? And I think actually just spending time getting inspired. I think people often get frustrated. It's like, okay, I'm going to be more creative. And then you sit down to sort of do creativity and you're like,
be
then you
creative, right?
Yeah,
this
then
is
you
my
get
creative
annoyed because you're like, well, I don't know where to begin. It's like, get out there in the world. Like, you know, the ideas are not going to be right here. Like the ideas are out there. It's your job as a creative person to go and like, you know, I think match yourself with your ideas. You know, I think we're only ever capable of 50% of an idea. I think the other 50% of ideas is like, they're out there, you know, and it's your job as a creative person to go and play like a inspiration game of Snap with the world and match, you know, your 50% with the inspiration that's out there in the streets, in conversation with people, in going and watching films and art galleries however, going for a run, being in nature. Yeah. So that's how to unleash creativity by unleashing yourself and getting
out there. Yeah. And another really good question was, I was curious about that too. What are ways to keep track of creative thoughts? Are there any, I guess, tools you use or tips and tricks around that?
Yes. So we have a thing in Creative Quest called the Quest lists. And there's 3 lists. One is called list of firsts. And it's basically over a quest, we get people to write down all the things that they've done for the first time, big or small. And it's just a really nice way of looking back on it and think like, wow, this month I did like all of those things for the first time. And that's like I think we don't do a lot of we stop doing new things, you know, as we get a bit older. And I think it's good to celebrate that. We have a thing called the new questions list, which is basically getting people to, you know, question the world around them a little bit more. And when something, a new sort of thing comes up that they think like, oh, I haven't thought about that before. Like, what if this, or maybe that, why does this work like this? Write it down. Quite often it's in those questions that there's something, you know, it shows what you're curious about. And finally is a list that we call illuminations, which is keeping note of things that have happened to you just in your life. In our case, during a creative quest, but it doesn't have to be during a creative quest. I keep illuminations list when I'm on a quest or not, of moments that have lit you up in some way. Could be a conversation you've had with somebody, could be an email that you've received, or like a beautiful moment in nature, you know, the way the light is moving through the trees. It could be in a conversation that you overheard in a coffee shop, a piece of art that you saw, like, you know, those moments of connection come in any form and will be different for everybody, but it's really nice to note them down, because I think those illuminations are often the little seeds for really nice creative ideas, because what might be on my illuminations list would be very different to anyone else's, and it says something about where you find beauty in the world of beauty. So yeah, we get people to keep note of those things. And we have another thing called the Quest Lab, where we help people sort of turn those questions and illuminations like into projects of all kinds.
Yeah, that is so cool. I'm gonna check that out. So by the way, everybody check out Sam and Creative Quests. Might participate in one, because I could use the creative jolt myself. And we'll put in the follow-up notes, we'll put a link again to it as well. There is one more, we have one time maybe for one more question, which I thought was really interesting as well. Is, what are some tips or ideas to foster creativity in a totally remote workplace with people in multiple time zones? Is there anything different?
Yeah. Well,
or, you know, a variation there.
Well, Creative Quest is a digital, not, well, as an example, Creative Quests that we run are mostly for online. We have people join from all around the world, all on different time zones. And there's something about that which has been really, really magical, actually, like knowing that everyone is kind of coming together for the same purpose. And it's just to kind of explore creativity and have different types of conversations for an hour and a half. But I think, you know, I think there's ways that you can introduce small rituals, you know, and carving out time that is specifically meant for doing different things, you know. Yes, you probably have your weekly meeting to talk about goals and, you know, projects and whatever it might be. But, you know, what if you had a weekly hour and a half that was just about like, it was just about a workshop, or it was just about, you know, you're all going to watch a film together, or whatever it happens to be. I think creating some sense of ritual in and kind of, yeah, communing in a digital world it's hard, but you have to make it feel different, you know. It's even simple things like arriving on a Zoom call and making sure that when somebody logs in, it feels different to how the weekly meeting feels, you know.
Just to create that space.
Simple things. There's music playing, there's a visual,
like
there's a visual on the screen. Like, just these things are just very simple, like they're just a nod to the fact this is a different kind of environment. Like, you know, we're here to just be with each other, rather than like, hey, have you got that thing done?
Yeah, like resetting your brain. Yeah,
it's a signal. This is a different kind of space.
Yeah.
And I think creating space for that, yeah, in remote work stuff is really important. Not easy, but also ask people what they want.
Yeah, simple as that, right?
Yeah, ask people like what would help people in a team more, you know, feel like, yeah, it's ask for suggestions.
Yeah,
And
I love that. Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you so much. And thank you. I learned so much from you. I know our community will as well. And thanks everybody for joining us. I hope we'll see you at a future skill building event. Our next one is actually around the corner, February 24th, and it will be a virtual HR hackathon. And we're gonna hack reimagining layoffs because that is in the news right now. A lot of companies struggling with it. And of course, HR is in the midst of it. And I think maybe we can humanize the process and the experience a bit more. So we're going to do a hackathon, a virtual hackathon around it. So I hope you guys can join us. If not, we're going to have future events throughout the year. And again, Sam, thank you so much. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Just one more thing. Just
Yeah.
very quickly, I would be doing myself a disservice if I didn't say that we also run workshops and give talks to companies. So if creative workshops and, you know, an inspiring talk on what it means to be creative is helpful to your business, then yeah, drop me an email, sam@channel12.co.uk.
Yay. All right. Bye.
Bye, everybody.